If you're a follower of this channel, you have probably realized by now I like my gangster films. In fact, my love of them, coupled with the lack of discourse around the crime genre on YouTube, is pretty much what made me start making videos on them. I do actually remember when I first got into them as a teenager. I watched Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather and was mesmerized by its quality. I watched the second one and was equally stunned. Then I watched the third one and I was left kinda confused. But this kickstarted a marathon of sorts. Within the space of a month or so, I watched many of the big name gangster movies, mainly from the generation of film directors who came from the Hollywood New Wave. Goodfellas, Once Upon a Time in America, Casino, A Bronx Tale, all of those kind of mob movies which today are considered classics. For me, it was a case of looking up what the most well-known mob movies were and tracking them down. Now of course, and this is relevant because of the point I'm making with the title of this video, watching a bunch of highly rated movies together in a short amount of time where actors, plots and themes can cross over can have a detrimental effect. For example, not too many films are going to come off too well when you've just watched the first two Godfather films. And believe it or not, I actually thought Goodfellas was just pretty good the first time I watched it, not the masterpiece I think it is today, although that is a running trend I noticed with Martin Scorsese films, in that my opinion of them usually grew the longer I allowed them to digest. Anyway, within that mob movie frenzy, there were two films that stuck out to me as disappointing, given their hype: The Untouchables and Scarface. The common denominator here is of course that they're both directed by the same guy, Brian DePalma. His influence in the industry, including introducing Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese to each other, is clear. And his ability as a director of erotic Alfred Hitchcock-esque thrillers isn't something I could comment on at the time, because I hadn't seen enough of those movies, but honestly I found myself scratching my head at the idea of De Palma being considered one of the great gangster film directors. Carlito's Way was great, a mature, grown-up gangster film that is probably De Palma's last great film, and which has a few videos dedicated to it on this channel if you're interested. But The Untouchables came off as a bit of a cartoon initially. That's a conversation for another day. But Scarface was the real head scratcher. I just didn't see what the fuss was about. It was loud, brass, abrasive, formulaic, and pretty simple. And yet I'd heard so many great things about it. In the years since, I've had no inclination to make a video on it, to analyze it, and in spite of its reputation, it isn't really talked about. On an analytical level, I mean, from guys online who usually talk about gangster films. I personally wouldn't really have much to say about it. Perhaps you just had to be there to experience the zeitgeist at the time for why the film is considered such a hit. But I really, and again, after watching hidden gems in the gangster genre and lesser known films that were really good, I found my opinion cementing on the idea that Scarface is the most overrated gangster film ever made. And yeah, it might be a little unfair, but I do feel that to an extent De Palma has coasted off a reputation of being in the Hollywood New Wave crowd, with the likes of Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, Friedkin, while never really being as good as those guys. Back to Scarface. I have to admit that the reputation of the film and the main character Tony Montana in particular may have played a part in shaping the way I thought of the film. I had friends that seemed to idolize Tony. In general, there is an idea that the more dense movie-going crowd feel he's someone to look up to. So obviously, it left a bad taste in my mouth when I watched the film, and Tony was a violent maniac who also may have had the hots for his sister. For the ego and the bravado Montana showed to be emulated and aspired to, all the gunfire and chaos in the climax, it was like people turned the film off 5 minutes before the end and didn't catch the part where he ends up in a pool of his own blood. The way I figured, Scarface was for the boys and The Godfather was for the men. Of course, I can't blame the film for that, I don't think, looking back. A modern day equivalent would probably be The Wolf of Wall Street. I watched that film and it was evident that Jordan Belfort had not been modelled as a character to look up to and to be idolised. But there were many people who were inspired by him, and it even led to an increased interest in stockbroking positions. If I had been aware of this perception of him, that so many people wanted to be like him, and then I watched the movie, chances are the film would have left a bitter Scarface taste in my mouth, and that's not the film's fault. In any case, it was time for a rewatch of Scarface, often touted as De Palma's masterpiece, one of the greatest gangster films of all time, apparently. often grouped with The Godfather and Goodfellas as the ultimate mob movie trio, and boasting Al Pacino in electrifying form. I did watch Scarface with softer eyes this time, wanting to see what I hadn't before, wanting for it to win me over, and maybe purely on merit, or maybe because I'm subconsciously afraid of getting ripped apart in the comment section down below, I did actually enjoy it a lot more on my rewatch. With the toxicity of Tony Montana wannabes put to a side, I was able to enjoy the film for what it was, a rise and fall story of a criminal who made it to the top and then came crashing down, flamboyantly directed and anchored by a ferocious performance from its lead actor. Let's start with Pacino. Some lament the fact that Scarface started the shouty, overacting, theatrical Pacino we got post-1990s. But even if that is the case, even if he's chewing the scenery so hard his teeth should have been shattered by now, you've got to give it to Pacino. That was some performance. I look at Michael Corleone, I look at Serpico, even Pacino's more wild performances like in Dog Day Afternoon, and Scarface still feels like a million miles away. It's a mesmerizing transformation. He's practically a different person, and that's true transformative acting. The way he talks is iconic now. It's like he's got chocolate bars in his mouth and is refusing to spit them out.
Who put this thing together? Me! That's who! Who do I trust? Me!
There's so much arrogance and overconfidence in the performance. If it was another film, another actor, you could say the director has failed to rein in his lead star. But here the film and performance are a perfect marriage. It was a departure because it was Pacino as a showman for the first time, not Pacino the character actor. I mean, look at this shot of him smiling. It doesn't look like Al Pacino, and Montana's devilishness is perfectly captured in a single still image. It's also worth mentioning, surprising as it sounds, that Pacino only made 5 movies in the 80s, and they were all bombs. Financially and critically, even Scarface didn't do well initially, but if there were any hint that Pacino's star power was dwindling, it certainly didn't show in his showy performance, as if to say, I'm still here, the 80s haven't killed me yet. You have to watch the film in a certain way. It doesn't hold up in a manner of speaking. It is very 80s, the way it's shot. It is very over the top. It is very bombastic. And these things are a far cry from today's movies, which try to be all dark and gritty and moody and whatnot. But in this case, these elements are attributes, not flaws, if you allow them to be. In the film, a Cuban immigrant arrives in the US as a lowly dishwasher and rises to the very top of the criminal underworld and makes some wholesome friends along the way. For sure, the rags to riches element of the film definitely speaks to something in us. Couple that with Montana's devil-may-care attitude towards everything, his ambition and drive, garnished with something of an ethical code, and an older me can kind of see where some of the admiration for the character comes from. It's a fantasy of sorts. It's escapism for the guy who pushes the trolley at Tesco's to imagine shooting his irritating boss with a pistol, or the chemistry teacher who's dying of both boredom and cancer at his 9-to-5 job to fantasize about running an empire as a drug kingpin. In a weird way, Scarface is a comfort movie because it exists in a completely different universe to most who are watching the film. I do now want to make 1 or 2 videos on Tony Montana, so I'll leave a lot of the character stuff to a side here. But an older, more movie-wise me was able to appreciate DePalma's stylish technical ability a lot more when I initially dismissed Scarface as an adult Looney Tunes movie. In the opening scene, for example, the camera constantly circles Montana like the authorities interrogating him. The guy getting stabbed early in the film and walking through a chaotic crowd was a great scene, and a particular highlight was during the famous chainsaw scene, where the camera goes from the window where all the chaos is occurring to the car where Manny is chatting to a girl. The beautiful outside, the sun, the chatter of people, the laissez-faire Miami attitude. And then the camera goes back to the window and the chainsaw noise intensifies, with us knowing something truly horrific is happening in the room. It's self-confident filmmaking. I found Tony more interesting as a character this time around. It's interesting that I mentioned The Wolf of Wall Street earlier because the 2 films have themes that cross over: greed, excess, and how much will ever be enough. Montana has an empire. He's got the cars, the trophy wife, even a tiger. And if he wasn't so greedy, if he even just paid the banker what the man wanted, things might have turned out different. Of course, things aren't handled as operatically as, say, Casino. This is DePalma after all, not Scorsese. But there's more here than I initially thought. It's funny seeing Tony chase materialism, to climb the ladder ruthlessly fast, and then once he gets there, once he reaches the apex, he becomes depressed and miserable. It reminds me of the Joker in The Dark Knight when he says,
"I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it."
Montana has made it to all intents and purposes, but there's no spirituality there. There's no offset against something wholesome. He now has nothing to look forward to, and it's lonely at the top. The movie is a twisted version of the American dream, a showcase that the dream itself is hollow. So even if one manages the difficult task of achieving it, it brings nothing. And it's almost comical how the movie compares Tony with Manny. The latter always seems to be chilled, smiling and enjoying himself. His love for Tony's sister seemingly genuine and not some weird control complex like whatever Tony has. Tony's marriage on paper is what it's all about, a beautiful young woman, but the marriage is hollow and superficial, as is everything Tony chases. It's a movie of two halves, and that half comes with the jacuzzi scene, which is very similar to the scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where DiCaprio says it's like paradise on earth, and then is woken up by his wife with cold water to the face, beginning an argument. I wouldn't be surprised if Winter watched this jacuzzi scene for inspiration. There's even crossover points made by each husband about their wives having no real goals in their lives.
Oh my God, you had to deal with the golf course people too! What a Greek tragedy, honey, oh my God! You probably had to pay them in cash with your hands, what a fucking burden! And actually do some work besides swiping my fucking credit card all day, huh? Because I can't keep track of your professions, honey. Because last month you were a wine connoisseur, now you're an aspiring landscape architect. Let me get that right.
How would you know, bubblehead? You ever do nothing like get your hair fixed and powder your nose? You know what your problem is, pussycat?
What is my problem, Tony?
You got nothing to do in your life, man. Why don't you get a job or something, you know? Do something. Be a nurse. Work with blankets, lepers, that kind of thing.
There's a lot of interesting lines in the film. Nothing exceeds like excess. Or, is this it? Is this what it's all about? Eating, drinking, fucking, snoring, then what? It's almost admirable how Tony recognizes that there must be something more to this, and perhaps a line that cuts particularly for him is when his wife says Frank never talked about money. Maybe Frank had that thing, whatever it was, that Tony lacks. Insight, reflectiveness, restraint, who knows, that's a conversation for another day. But Montana has a particular outlook, an attitude, which definitely propelled him to the top, but it was ultimately destructive. What does a man want who wants for nothing, who has everything, and he's still not happy? Still greedy, still petty. And Frank warned him about those who are flashy, not lasting. The ones who are low-key are the ones who last in the business. And the partial inspiration of Scarface, Al Capone, is a perfect example of this. For as flashy and famous as he was only boss for a few years. Still, one could argue Tony's demise is multifaceted. You can point to the banker scene where he refuses to pay him. You can say that maybe Tony had red lines he didn't want to cross, so didn't kill the target who had his family in the car. The only morally good thing he chose to do and it got him killed. Or maybe the message of the film is quite simply, don't get high on your own supply. So anyway, that's all I have to say on the film at the moment. What do you think of Scarface? Do you think it's overrated? Or do you consider it one of the best crime films ever made? Would you like to see more videos on it? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.